So we're very fortunate to be here with Ken Micklethwaite, who we funded way back in 2016. But a lot of that work that you've been working on, Ken, we'll get into, and we'll talk about how that has developed over these sort of last 10 years. But before we do, let's start at the beginning. Have you always been interested in science? I mean, how did it all come about?
So I guess I was always interested in learning and knowledge. But I think, like, in fact, the majority of people, I didn't actually understand what science was. I really kind of thought of science as the actual results of science. So I thought of science in terms of, these are the facts that we know about the world. This is the technology that we have. And I thought that was science. Yeah. It wasn't actually until I started doing science that I really came to understand, what science was. And so I kind of came to science relatively late. I'd basically completed my advanced training in haematology, and I was provided the opportunity to actually do a PhD in something that had really caught my interest. So at the beginning of my training, I'd attended a presentation by a PhD student who showed this fantastic data showing how they'd taken immune cells from a healthy donor and they'd grown them in the laboratory, and they'd selected out the ones that were specific for a really problematic infection in a bone marrow transplant recipient, and then they'd given them to that bone marrow transplant recipient, and you could actually see them expanding in the blood and having an effect on that patient. And it just blew my mind that we could potentially manipulate or even engineer the immune system to achieve an end therapeutic goal. Right? So,
and that's the way you started your interest in science, or even where you started looking at your PhD.
Yeah. Well, I'd always been, I guess, interested in knowledge, right? And learning. I was one of these sort of nerdy kids who actually enjoyed school, right? And when I was thinking about what I was going to do for the rest of my life as I got to the end of high school, one of the things that attracted me to medicine was this understanding that it was a field where learning never stops, right? And so, I was really, I was drawn to that aspect of medicine initially. When I actually got into medicine and actually started practicing medicine, it was almost a surprise to me that in actual fact the most gratifying thing about medicine is the interactions that you have with patients, and particularly once I started actually doing haematology and treating patients with blood cancers, it's the shared experience of sort of like identifying their problems and solving their problems that was really satisfying to me. And so I saw science as basically an extension of that. And I guess I've always since then seen science as an extension of that. But again, I really didn't understand what science was when I started. Not until I was actually knee deep in the PhD did I understand, right? And in fact, right, a good example of how I didn't understand science was in the weeks before I was about to start my PhD, Ken Bradstock, who was one of my mentors during my PhD, we were walking along talking about the journey ahead, and he said, science, it's such a humbling experience doing science. And I was thinking, what do you mean? Like, I thought he was talking like a politician who's just won, right? Okay. And it's like, yes, I'm so humbled by the fact that I whipped the opposing side. It was literally a couple of weeks into the PhD when I realized, this is what he meant. I've never failed so much in my entire life, right? And so going back to sort of the most gratifying part of medicine, I feel that having that has always really helped me overcome failures, because I've got this direct connection to, well, why am I doing this? It's because of these patients, and so I feel very fortunate, because I know a lot of scientists who work really hard, and science by its nature, if you're pushing the boundaries, there is failure. If you're not failing at all, it probably means you're not pushing hard enough. And so, some people leave science because of failure, and I've always felt very fortunate that I have that extra sort of motivation in that my particular branch of science has always been about trying to get new therapies into patients that will make a real difference in their lives.
I'm glad you talk about the failure side of things. It's one of the things that we really want to highlight with these videos, is that it's an industry, it's a career choice that is a 99 or 95% of the time you come into work and there's another no. There's another sort of failure for something that you're doing, and yet scientists keep picking themselves up and coming back into work and working again, because every time you peel another layer of that onion, you discover something else, and it moves you down to another pathway. It's very interesting. It's good to hear you say that. Okay. So a big part of our rallies is that people work together. They work together in teams to be able to make sure they can make it all the way through. And I should imagine, you were talking before about a previous colleague, but I should imagine you've had many different people that you work with to be able to do your research. Is that the case with the funding that we provided?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that surprised me about science, so there's a number of things, before I started actually doing science, I had no idea about. But one of the things that surprised me about science was the social nature of science, right? Like, from the casual conversations that scientists have when they're in the lab, doing their work that just makes their day go by, to the more sort of serious, structured conversations about individual projects or grants or sort of plans for the future or programs. Nothing happens in isolation. Even individuals who make breakthroughs, it's nearly always been in the context of groups of people working together towards sort of common goals and common projects. Very rarely has anything truly ever been due to the isolated one individual working in a basement lab. Those are more kind of the exception than the rule, really, I think.
You mentioned earlier that you've had a number of PhD students that work with you throughout the course of your research, and that you've had two that have just finished, and you've got somebody else that's currently writing at the moment. And is that the way that the process works? You always have PhD student candidates that are coming through that will work with you on your research?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the big challenges of science, I think, is that the funding is very periodic, and so you go through periods of abundance where, for some reason, your particular field is popular and in everyone's mind, and so they're willing to dole out the cash, and so you have a larger group. And then you go through times where the funding is reduced, and so, but basically throughout the last 15 years, I've had a variety of sort of junior and senior research assistants and PhD students pretty constantly throughout that time, doing a whole heap of work to sort of advance the program. The other sort of important thing is that, the work that I've been doing here at Westmead has never been, isolated even to just my team. There's a broader program on campus which, without all the infrastructure that had been really established over, the last 10, 15 years before I started, I would not have been able to do even half of what I was able to do in terms of the either the basic laboratory work or the translational sort of clinical trials that I've done over the last 10, 15 years.
So the funding itself not only funds the work that you do, but it's an investment in the research environment, and so therefore that investment helps future researchers as well.
So the funding, I guess, there's constantly various sources of funding which contribute to the whole program. And that, is basically the way research has been funded worldwide and in Australia for a long time. You know, another thing that I'm fortunate about is that I am a doctor, and so my salary has never been part of the funding that I've sought. I really feel for a lot of the scientists, the pure scientists, who essentially their salary is completely dependent on getting, you know, grant after grant after grant. And so there's a certain instability and uncertainty that they have in their lives that I think most other people don't necessarily have. You know, every two, it's like clockwork. Every 2 to 3 years, these scientists have to write grants just to be able to continue
on.
you know, buy a house or feed themselves or their family.
Yeah.
So you know, funding is sort of a difficult issue for particularly scientists, but it also, the other difficulty with the instability or uncertainty of funding is that, particularly when you've got a long-term vision or a long-term plan, it can be difficult to enact that without sort of constant funding turning over. So, you know, again, I'm pretty fortunate because, you know, Professor David Gottlieb has driven the overarching program for nearly 3 decades now. And he has been just very, very good at attracting funding to continue to drive the program forward and develop new sort of therapies for the patients. So, you know, going back to that question of sort of team, I guess, you know, any work that I've done has always been in sort of collaboration with sort of a local overarching program.
All right. That answer was really interesting. It was a different way of, because obviously we speak to many people that are pure scientists, and so
oh my
the
goodness,
grant application,
it's so hard.
It's very onerous.
It's so
and they spend
hard
so
for
much
them.
time writing applications, and this is one of my big things that I would like us to work on as we move on with Box Rallies, is to work on how that process can be better structured, and certainly even the notification period and how people can be notified a little bit quicker, because whether you've got the lead, but those that are sort of working in the labs often don't even know if they've got funding or therefore a job.
No,
after,
that's exactly right.
Like a couple of weeks, and then you know, as you said, families and mortgages and everything else. I mean, how do you do? Anyway, okay. So, a very simple question: what's one of your most cherished achievements in your field over the years?
So, you know, without a doubt, I think the greatest achievement that I've had has been taking a product from just inception through to a clinical trial where there are people who participated in that clinical trial who literally would have been dead within days without the treatment that I gave them. And I know with 100% certainty that those people are alive 5-6 years later now. And that's
a pretty incredible achievement.
Yeah, I mean, that is just, you know, hands down the best thing I've ever done. So, yeah. Great.
That was great. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I mean, what's coming next?
So I guess my career has sort of changed a little bit along with the field. So the field of sort of immunotherapy and genetic engineering is now moving into a phase where it's gone from research, laboratory work, through clinical trials, and now into a situation where these therapies are available as standard of care. And so over the last 5 years, I've been really heavily involved in the implementation of standard of care, advanced cellular therapies, immunotherapies for patients with blood cancers. And so that hasn't left a lot of room for direct sort of laboratory work and supervision. And so I've kind of diversified, I guess, my activities so that I've got on one hand that really heavy focus on the clinical translation of the field as a whole. I'm working with sort of local and national collaborators on ways of trying to actually increase the potential application of those advanced therapies. And I'm collaborating sort of locally and nationally on sort of newer sort of therapies, including both sort of cancer-based and sort of outside of cancer as well, because the field of immunotherapy, I think in the next 5 years is going to really, it's going to be in almost every aspect of medicine. People with chronic infections, people with autoimmune diseases like arthritis and lupus, those people will be having cellular immunotherapies that we're currently using to treat people with cancer. Right?
Yeah,
and so you can see that not just people with cancer are going to benefit from this field, but almost the whole of society will be benefiting from the advances that have occurred in this field over the last sort of 10, 15 years.
Our community would love to know if you have any interests that sit outside of your medical field.
So I think if you had have asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said, no, science is my hobby. Because, basically, I lived a fairly imbalanced life, I think, where most of my time was consumed with the science. And I think it was important at that stage to be so. But I'm now a little bit healthier. So I have a couple of different interests. So I'm a bit of a coffee nerd and love a really good cup of coffee. I love gardening, or rather landscaping, I think. Throwing rocks around and digging tons of earth is kind of more what I do. And I've recently gotten into woodworking, sort of building cabinets and things like that, using power tools. And it's interesting because each of those is sort of like, so the coffee is, as I say, it's a very nerdy, kind of finicky, almost like an experiment in every cup. The gardening is like a physical exertion. Your mind is just numb from you're just focused on the physical activity. And then the woodworking is very sharp spinning blades that one has to be hyper-focused on so that one doesn't cut off their fingers. And so it's sort of like these different activities that sort of complement each other, I think. So yeah, those are my hobbies, I guess you'd say at the moment.
Nice. Do you have a bucket list thing that you want to do at some point in your life?
No, I don't really have a bucket list. I think I would be quite happy if in 10, 15 years time I retire, hang out with my family, indulge in my hobbies, and just have a relaxed time, I think.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've probably earned it.
No real bucket.
It sounds like you've earned it already.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, Ken, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
I really
Thank
appreciate
you very
it.
much.